Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone. This is the last of our Trese roundtables. This is a very special episode for me because I am actually talking to people I have known for 25 years. Good Lord, I'm old. Hi, guys. What's up?
Hey, Jose.
Hi,
Hello.
Jose.
Quick introductions. I am with Kyle, Kim, Ben, Kat, Maya, Trisha. These are people who have not lived in the Philippines for 20 years, right? 2001? That was it?
Yeah.
It's been
So-
a while, yes.
Having said that, can you tell me what were your, how did you feel about the show existing and what expectations you had going in? Kyle, let's start with you since you're on the top left.
Um,
I have a very good system.
well, we had talked about this a bunch of times before. It had been my dream for the longest time to have a show like this featuring creatures from Philippine mythology. So I was just glad that somebody actually made it. And I remember you telling me about Budge pitching the show a few years ago and nobody was biting. So I'm glad somebody finally did, took the chance on it.
Kim.
I think it's I love the obviously like the nostalgia of like seeing things like from my childhood and because I grew up in the Philippines and then watching some of those things like fleshed out, like because there's no really like defined like things for some of these like creatures and all that stuff that's interesting. And I think it's always good to see things visually and how people imagine it and how it portrays from like words, narratives, comic books to like the scene. So I think that's like another angle that I like to like. I enjoyed seeing these things on the screen.
Ben, I know you don't keep a lot of track of pop culture news. So when did you find out?
I basically found out when you told me and you said that I should watch it. So I don't really know if I had any clear expectations going into it, but I do like the idea of having more representation about other cultures and especially other like folklore and mythology beyond the sort of like standard vampire blah 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 stuff. So I think that was really cool.
Hey, Miss Hollywood, what's up?
Hi. Well,
Oh, that's
sort of
Kat.
like hello. Sort of like Kyle and Kim, I think the idea of it is just so great. I had always thought Filipino monsters would be a really fun thing to highlight because it's unique. It's a lot of them are weird and really bizarre, and it would be interesting to see how they visually translate. It's also something I had never even seen a representation of growing up. I just heard the story, so my imagination went in like crazy weird directions, and it was fun to see how they depicted them. Some of them were way scarier than I had imagined them too.
Episode
And
3?
also, of course,
Episode 3?
yeah. And of course, like the representation is so important, and it was so fun and nostalgic to see. Oh, this is where we grew up. These are like real locations. It's a little surreal, but really exciting.
So what makes the next two girls a little unique is that you both have actually read some of the comics. So Maya.
Yeah, I was really excited to see it because I had read the comic books years ago, thanks to you. And it was exciting to see how they were going to adapt it. And I wanted to see how they were going to tie all the stories together. And I also wanted to see Manila. It was exciting to have Manila be showcased as a location. Raya just came out, so that was another exciting thing. I was like, okay, there's Asian culture, which is now getting mainstreamed. So this was just another way to highlight, Asian culture in Netflix. And, it was always something new to watch on Netflix, but finally there's a little bit more variety than just your Japanese anime or your Korean drama.
Korean dramas.
There's actually a Filipino anime. So I was really excited, and I told everyone, I told my family, I was like, there's a Filipino anime coming out. So that was what I was looking forward to.
Maya's only bringing up Raya because if you guys use that new Voila app on Maya's face, it turns her into Raya.
That's right.
Trisha.
That's right. It's too bad I couldn't use that as my filter.
Trisha.
Well, I was only introduced to the comics really recently because we were having a conversation about sort of Filipino supernatural folklore. And you were like, oh, I've got this like really great comic that you should read. And I started reading it, and there was so many things where I had known kind of the names for it and sort of a very general background. And then reading the comics, there were, at least with the international version, there were explanations of like a little bit more about, you know, the different creatures and all that kind of stuff, which I thought was super interesting. And we had a bunch of conversations about it. And then you were like, oh my God, it's coming out on Netflix. And I was like, what? So I was excited. And like the animation style is very similar to Avatar. So I was like, oh, it's like Filipino Avatar. Very cool. But I really, going into it, I wasn't really sure how to, like, what to expect, because like with comics and when you adapt them, it always turns out differently than you think. So like my expectations going in were like, this is going to be cool in the sense that, you know, Manila is going to be showcased, which is great since we all kind of grew up there. But also like, how are they going to take sort of the source material and make it palatable for like an international audience? Like I didn't really know how that was going to happen, but I was
one
excited.
thing, they colored it.
They did. I was like, oh, that's the color they're supposed to be. I see.
I like the color. I like that they added that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
it looked good. I wish it was a little grittier, but I think it looked good.
Desaturated? Would you have preferred it more desaturated?
No, not desaturated, just grittier.
Oh, like
Like the
More.
backgrounds. The backgrounds were fantastic. But the characters kind of popped against some of them because they look so clean versus the backgrounds. Not really a complaint. It's just more of a preference.
I get what you mean.
Like, more like the opening sequence in terms of grittiness.
Yeah, that opening sequence where they showed the different locations, I was like, ooh, it was gorgeous.
Yeah.
And did it hit nostalgia buttons for you guys, the opening sequence?
It did a little bit for me, but I've been gone for so long that, I mean, Manila looks so different from when I was there.
Oh, that's true.
So
That's true.
And I was telling my mom just like the shot of, or like the animation of the over Manila Dubai. I was like, just looking at it, I was like, that's home. Like, holy crap. It's like, that's Manila. It's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I love like the little details that they have, just like the real backgrounds and what makes like, you know, Manila like the city. Like I told you guys, like I laughed when I saw the Bawal Umihi Dito sign, like in one of the scenes. That really just like hit. It's like, yes, we're in the Philippines and it's happening. So, and you also like try to pick up on the like, oh, I think I know that building. Are they talking about this building? Specifically locales, like you know, the front face of the police station that they use is the one in Manila, right? The main one. Or is it the one in Makati?
it's the one in Makati.
Like-
it's the one by South
Yeah.
Cemetery. Near
That's
where
it,
we
so
went to
it is the one
school.
near South, right? Okay. So
Seeing
yeah,
Meralco,
it's like picking up.
same thing.
Yeah,
the
I remember
Meralco
the
building.
Meralco building.
I giggled when I saw, and that's where the, you know, the people with electricity powers are in the Meralco building. That was a nice little like nod.
Yeah.
But yeah, seeing iconic places just like that, and seeing also just like things that make Manila Manila, it's kind of cool.
How'd you feel
Like
when you
that's a help guy. In episode
Yes.
4, which I think was my favorite episode, it had the
Yeah.
jeepney. I had the like passing the money.
Is it
down.
passing the money?
passing the
Yes,
money?
the passing the money.
Like all those little moments where they're like, oh yeah, it is Manila.
It's so interesting when I try to explain to people what a jeepney is, and
No.
you know, you don't ever forget the details. It's like, oh yeah, you pass the money down and they pass it to the driver in front. It's like, so that's how you pay. There's no card. It's like, no cards. we
But
deal with
that
cash.
jeepney had everybody
Not
spaced
automated.
out really well. Like everybody had their own room, which was like not like
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would say was unrealistic about this Manila was there's not enough traffic.
yeah.
true.
True. They
But
got
see,
it way too quickly.
but
Yeah.
see,
A lot
that's
of it
the
probably
thing.
happened at like
The
3 in
cars
the morning
moving.
though, right?
Driving day.
Literally, and like they stayed in their lanes, and I was like, that is not Manila. That is
You don't have the bus crossing like 5 lanes,
Like,
cutting
yeah.
everyone off.
Horizontal as
or
it
the
crosses.
people just like walking, like weaving in and out.
I tried explaining a Jeep to one of my non-Filipino friends once, and they said, so essentially it's a bus. And I'm like, you don't understand. No, it's not a bus.
It's a bus car.
Like a Jeep Wrangler? Nah, no,
No,
not quite.
not that either.
Front, maybe, but not the rest of it.
So I take it that if I ask you guys what you liked about the show, the depiction of Manila is on pretty much everybody's list, minus the traffic and the order.
Minus the traffic.
Yeah.
What else
Yeah,
did you
it's
like
just
about
setting the atmosphere and the tone of Manila was really
Yeah.
cool. And even like right from the beginning, they established like, and also this place is really corrupt and there are a lot of people with bad intentions, but it's sort of, like any big city. But I feel like Manila has that extra little bit of flavor, especially in recent years.
Yeah, lots
I
of
think-
powerful dynasties at play.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, for me, it sounds like super basic, but having a female protagonist like that that really stuck out to me. Not only is it, set in Manila and all that kind of stuff, but having a woman that has that amount of power, particularly coming from Manila, like we all know that it is not generally a, feminist kind of city. I mean, to be fair, most families are quite matriarchal.
Matriarchal, but it's not feminist.
But it's not feminist. So having that character be a woman, I think was huge. Just in terms of what culturally, it's always been kind of a male dominated society, even though behind closed doors, it's actually a female dominated society. So it was kind of like bringing out what we know of our families, like of our lolas and our moms and stuff, who really like rule everything. But from the outside, it looks different, right? So it's like, oh, we took that and here she is.
Give me this.
Yeah, and she's not a matriarchal character either. She's like really
not at
tough
all.
and strong, but she's not nurturing or anything like that.
Give me this. Is it essential that Alexandra is a woman? Because
Yeah,
she
I think
was.
it was.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I
Go,
think
Maya.
she was originally pitched as a man, but I think she really had to be a female character to make it work. Otherwise, it would have been pretty banal. I mean, you see so many hero male figures go in and save the day. I don't think there would have been that like interesting or I don't know, like emotional attachment to her as a character if she had been a man. It wouldn't have been the same thing. And the dynamic between her and the different characters wouldn't have worked as well. I think her and Guerrero have a really good dynamic because he's like sort of a father figure and like she's kind of helping him out at the same time. And then she wouldn't have the same dynamic with her two bodyguard guys.
Look at the way she says that.
Favorites, Maya's favorites.
While we're on the
main
subject,
character
who
show.
was everybody's favorite characters?
Hank, 100%.
Who among us has a Tito like Hank?
Oh, I
I
did.
think we
Not really.
Yeah.
I don't know. I was torn between Guerrero and Hank. They were probably my two favorites, but like tied for different reasons.
Guerrero for me, I think.
What are those reasons, Trisha?
Hank just like he just strikes me as just like your sounds terrible, but like your typical like older brother Filipino kind of like guy who has your back, but it's also just a little bit drunk and a little bit like something. And then Guerrero is more of that fatherly figure that I think I mean, I don't know, like I'm not really sure exactly why I'm drawn to those two, but like I guess to me they also seem the most realistic in some ways of like my own experience. So
Well,
I did like Guerrero too, because he's sort of like the normal guy with no powers, but he's just trying to do his best and protect people as much as he can. And I tend to be drawn to those kind of characters.
Is there no love for the other cop? Tapia?
Oh, it's
He's a
like,
sidekick
another guy.
that's like kind of cool. So
Yeah, he was cool too. Maybe my second or third
I
favorite.
mean you phrase it as favorite, like they can't all be favorite.
Ben, you have a favorite character?
I don't know. I felt like Guerrero was cool, but he also felt in some ways unrealistic. He was like always like the moral compass and always did everything right, which I don't think is always realistic, especially in Manila when you have such conflicting choices.
He was a
He was
Disney
also the good cop.
You mean a
Yeah,
good
he was
cop?
It's a very
he was a good
idealistic
cop.
Unrealistic.
character for
It's
sure.
it's like really, but I did like Hank. Hank was really fun. I'm trying to think. I kind of liked Nuno in the beginning, but at the end I was like, oh, this was kind of a weird sort of surprise us.
I feel tricked.
Yeah, I feel
I
tricked.
know, I love that
But it
character,
didn't
and I was
really
like,
make
oh, man.
sense.
I didn't like that
Like,
either.
should I stop liking him? Maybe, I don't know.
I have to zoom in on Maya for this because Maya,
Well,
you know
I
he's
was
not supposed to
watching-
be.
He's in the comics he doesn't come out as a two-timer or a double crosser like that. So I actually texted today. I was like, Nuno, and yeah, it was a big twist
Traditionally-
from the comics.
Doesn't it work out traditionally? Because Nuno wasn't a white duende.
I
And
don't
the white
know
ones are the good ones.
necessarily.
It just felt kind of forced at the end. Like, I know that it was a little bit surprising, but the rationale for why he was doing it to me didn't really make sense because there wasn't any build up behind why he was like unhappy with the situation. It just kind of spilled it right out at the end. It's like, oh, the council.
Yeah.
blah, blah.
Yeah, it did
Yeah.
seem kind
It
of
was like
out of
that came
nowhere.
out of nowhere to me. I was like,
I
why?
think that
Like
comes
that didn't.
down to just
Yeah.
not like a lack of explanation in a lot of places. I mean, maybe because
I
it
agree.
is veer
Yeah.
from the source material. So it was like, there wasn't enough backstory to it where when it happens, you say, oh my God, like now I understand. It was more like it happens and you're like, what? What?
Yeah,
Yeah, the shock factor.
Yeah, I agree.
like it
But-
didn't
Part of me
surprise me.
was, yeah, it didn't really surprise me because I was also like, but these are all demons too, so they're probably all just
Yeah.
working for themselves, right?
He's a trickster, right? Like
Yeah, but
duendes are
see, that's
tricksters.
simplistic when you look at it though, because I mean, you think of the Tikbalan and they are technically also demons, right? But like the whole idea of Filipino folklore is that many of these demons have a semblance of some kind of honor depending on what they want in their environment or from the people that live in their areas, right? So it's easy to say, well, they're all this, but is it enough of an explanation?
Yeah, a lot of them are
And-
evil, but the Tikbalang are just dicks.
Yeah,
For me, it was
Yeah.
the duende. Well, when I was growing up, they were always presented to me as tricksters, so it wasn't really surprising to me.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think I would have been
Nuno.
more surprised by like the Tikbalang because
Yeah.
they seem to have honor, whereas this guy's like living
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
sewers,
They have a
scrapping by.
code.
Duende
Yeah,
are
he lives
meant
in a
to
sewer.
be essentially neutral, aren't they? Duende?
So
Like,
So
They're-
it depends on where you are. Different provinces have different versions of it. The one that I grew up, or the stories that I grew up with, were the white ones were the good ones, and the dark ones were not. And so when I first saw Nuno, I was like, "Oh, this must be one of the bad
Bad guy.
ones."
mm,
But then as the story went
Shadow.
on, it was like, well, maybe they're not following that dynamic. And then
Right.
at the end,
there's
when
that
he
other duende too. There's
betrays-
other duende too.
The red
Yeah.
ones.
Among
the red
yeah.
ones.
and then
But he
at the
wasn't
end when
exactly a
he-
good person either.
at the end when he betrays them, I was like, well, there, he's one of the bad ones. Although I don't think it was intentional. Like, I don't think they planned it out that way. Like, it really did feel like a last minute kind of thing where it was like, now he's bad.
Yeah.
So-
I feel like the main criticism that I have for the show is that they tried to do too much in too short of time.
Too
Yeah.
short. a
There
number of
was
episodes.
too many plot elements that they tried to cram into 6 episodes, that there were a lot of hanging threads that they weren't able to clearly resolve.
That's the most common complaint I've heard about the show.
That and the accent, but we'll get into that.
We'll
We'll
get
get to that.
The most common complaint I've heard about the show has been that there is not enough episodes. There's not enough time. There's not enough episodes. We want to see more, which is like the best negative thing you can say. Because that's like, all right, we want to see more. Okay, right.
Yeah.
What else did you like about the show? It can be anything, a favorite episode, a favorite moment, anything else.
I think going back to like the one of the central themes of the show is family, and I think it's important because the Philippines and the Filipino culture is really like, we're a very collectivist, like family-based society, right? And I think if you take a look at Alexandra, like, you know, she lost her father like a certain important period of time, but then people like filled in for those roles, and that's a very Filipino thing. Like the sergeant, I think one of the things about him is like, yeah, he is that like upstanding uncle figure, but it's not really the dad, but he did take over that role. And I think the whole idea that the twins will become good if we give them family and support, it's a very like Filipino, like idealistic view. And it applies in a lot of ways, a lot of experiences that I had, I think, just growing up with, you know, Filipino families in general. Family can come in many shapes and forms, and I think that's one of the themes that I like that they explored in the show.
Yeah.
And Filipino families are huge too. And I mean, second cousins, third cousins, like people you don't even know how you're related to them anymore, but you still treat them like they're close family. And whether or not you like them or you hate them, you tolerate them.
Yep.
And that's just how it is.
Everyone's tito or tita, and you don't
Yeah,
realize you're not
exactly.
related until you grow up.
Tito, tita,
I mean, even
manang,
for us,
manong.
right? When we talk about each other's parents, it's tita and tito. We're
Right.
not related, but it's like family is so important. And I think that whole, especially in the last episode where she's like, family is stronger than blood. Like, I think that's a very Filipino sentiment in a lot of ways. I mean, we talk a lot about how we're a family, right? But we're not related. Like, none of us are actually related. But that definitely stuck out to me too, is that familial unit, which I think has pros and cons. I mean, we've all discussed before, like the negative side of having that, but it really did stick out in the show as a positive thing, as like family is stronger than anything else. So
Yeah, I think for me, when I saw that they were really hammering in the theme of family, I was like, of course, this is the first international Filipino thing that's ever been made. How can you not emphasize? So even a scene like after, you know, at the end of the second episode where she's having breakfast with a kambal and Hank and the girls, it's like, yeah, that's a totally Filipino thing. Everybody eats together all at once.
you feed
Yeah, I was
people.
talking to Jose. I was like, I don't know who this Hank guy is or why he's there, but
that's it.
was
That's
there.
it, right? That's what.
he's just there, and
It's
we
part of
accept
what a
that he's
Filipino
there.
act-
Yeah,
That's part of what a
We just
Filipino
accept it.
family is.
Yeah,
I mean, I actually
he's my
never
dad's
bothered
friend.
asking that question. I just kind of took it as a given.
Like, he's your
Like,
tito 3 times removed.
you just
Yeah.
don't question
Okay.
it. It's like he's
Great.
there. Like,
He grew up with your dad. He's your
That's all
tito.
you need to know.
That's all you need
That's
to
all
know.
you need to know, for sure.
By the way, around the Balete tree when she enters it, some of those guys there, those are her brothers.
Right.
And I think
I
Yeah.
kind of assumed that, but I also didn't really know what happened to them.
yeah, I think that's intentionally left hanging.
That's part of season 2.
season
I know
2.
when they said
Mhm.
she's the 6th child, I was like,
I
where are
was
the
like,
other
wait,
ones?
what?
They
I
do.
know,
They
it's
do
like,
I
show
know
them.
about 2 children.
They do
It
show
was
them in one of the
unrealistic that she lived
flashbacks.
in such a big house without her siblings.
I think there's a big age difference. But so
Just like a normal Filipino family.
yeah, so
It happens.
one
I
of the
did
things
also, I wanted to say too that as much as there's an emphasis on family, there's a cool sort of a twist on the dynamic too, because her dad lied to her, and you know the main villain is also a bad guy, and he's trying to use the blood of his children against them to make them come to his side. And it's sort of like family
Are
is
you
really important,
sure
but
her
also the
dad lied
family,
to her?
Yeah.
but the
did
family
her
you
dad
choose
lie
is
to
more
her?
important.
Are you sure her dad lied to her, or is
Well, so we don't
Talag Busao
know,
a
because
liar?
was that just the talk of some lying god figure? But
Maybe.
even if he did, that's I feel like it's a realistic portrayal of a family. That's family.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
like,
Choose to believe that he lied to her, because otherwise we listened to a 10-minute monologue
Yeah.
where the
You
demon was
listen to a
lying.
TED Talk.
Yeah, we
Yes.
listened to a 10-minute lie. So I choose to believe that her dad lied to her.
For now.
For
For
your
now.
convenience.
For now. Yeah, for my for my
because
sanity.
there was 10 minutes of my life that would have been lost if he wasn't actually lying to her.
Yes.
But it's like ultimately that's sort of like the next generation of Filipino culture, maybe, where it's like family is really important, but you also can choose your destiny, and you don't have to be tied to what your parents have decided is your path. You can decide for yourself.
Here's
Um,
hoping.
one of the things that I found funny about the whole family thing is that she's the sixth child. But did you see the family portrait where it's just the parents and her?
And her.
She's the favorite because she's
She's
the
clearly a
last and the
favorite.
youngest.
Baby.
Is she the
That's
only
how it
girl?
goes.
She's the only
Is that-
girl.
She's
She's
the
the only
only
girl.
Wow, there you go.
Is that it?
There you go.
No,
Unika-
no, the dagger
Unika
is
Iha.
also a girl.
I mean, do you think that was
I
really
think-
intentional, or did they just want to gloss over the fact that she had siblings?
Did they leave it vague on purpose?
I've
Because
I
it's
think they
easier
did
to
that
draw.
because
It's
they
easier to
didn't-
draw 3 people than it is to draw 8.
And if they weren't talking about the brothers in any other part of the
Then-
episodes, why would they put them
Yeah.
in? It's just
They
It would
do-
be
confusing.
they do show
confusing,
the
like,
brothers,
wait,
though.
there's all these people. Where are the rest of them?
There's
I-
a flashback.
I've been
in
told
one of the
it's not-
episodes.
I've been told it's not uncommon for families with one girl for the parents to have a portrait with just the one girl.
That is
think
true.
I
it's-
don't know, Trisha.
That is.
I mean, but in my family, there's one girl and one boy, so it's a little bit different. It's
So-
not like there's multiple boys.
So my family, like, I only have one sister and 2 brothers, right? And we have pictures of her with my parents, but that's also because she's like the youngest kid too.
Yeah,
So
By
I've
far,
seen that a
by
lot
far.
with the
by
youngest
far, but that's the same situation
That's
as
true.
as
She's the
Alexandra.
youngest, yeah.
So is it? I don't necessarily believe that it's just because she's a girl. It could also just be because she's the youngest, and it could also just be because she's the toughest.
She's the chosen one.
Yeah,
kid. Could be
she's
for
chosen
any
one.
reason.
Why wouldn't you want to take pictures of her?
And
We'll
it's
take
like
pictures
her
of her 'cause
house.
She is the 6th child of the 6th child.
Yeah.
I remember
She can
Kyle.
decorate her house however she wants.
I remember Kyle telling me that he would prefer the sixth son of the sixth son or the sixth daughter of the sixth daughter. So something more specific.
Yeah,
And
because it's rarer
it's
rather than
rarer,
the 6th child.
and
I don't think it's that rare to have 6 children and one of them has 6 children.
I
like-
just realized now because the word for child in Filipino has no gender, it would not
Mhm.
work at all in the Tagalog language.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
You would have to be like
was just gonna
the sixth male child of the sixth male
Yes.
child.
Yes.
Ipang-anim na lalaking anak ng ipang-anim na lalaking anak does not have the same
Same. It doesn't have the ring to it.
Oh, off
Yeah.
your tongue.
Too many syllables.
Let's talk about the voice acting. First, which languages did you guys watch it in?
Oh,
Any-
all of them.
Were you just supposed to
No.
blurt it out at the same time?
No, you just go. Just
English.
anyone can start.
Yeah,
So, Kat,
English.
English.
English. Well, I
Tagalog.
watched one, yeah,
Philippine
Tagalog and
learning.
English.
English, Tagalog, and Japanese.
Which one was your favorite?
Overachiever.
You watched it 3 times?
I did watch it 3 times. Some scenes I switched between 3 languages just to see when I was first watching it. I think I watch a lot of like animated, Japanese cartoons, anime, and I think I'm used to that, like, hearing things in Japanese and reading the text in English. So it was interesting because I thought I would like it the best like that, but of course I gave them all a try. I think just to start off, I think because I think I'm the only one that actually did the Japanese thing. They did a really good job with the voice acting in Japanese, and I really liked it. I actually paid a lot more attention when I watched it in Japanese with the English subtitles, and I think it's
did you
because
try
of-
it in Japanese
it's
with the
the anime
Filipino
effect.
subtitles?
I did too, yeah.
Yeah.
It's about the same net effect. I think I read English and Filipino the same level, so there was no difference for me. But it did mess with me if I did the subtitles in English and the words in Filipino. That's a little different. But yeah,
know,
the
right?
Japanese
It's
with
weird.
the subtitles, that was good for me. I think I enjoyed it, and Netflix did a really good job with the voice acting. They really got a lot of like it just made it seem like the show would make a really good anime. Like, and I kind of like that.
Who
I
else?
preferred the Tagalog over the English. I can't even really say necessarily why. It seemed, I guess, in some ways more authentic. But then switching over to the English, when the Taglish accent came about, it was a little bit grating for me. Just because growing up in the Philippines, like, that's not what I remember it sounding like. So it really did seem like, I mean, we talked about this, like English speakers trying to put on the Taglish accent. And that took me out of it a little bit, I think. I think having the Tagalog sort of sucked me into the show more. But having, like, I don't know if they were Filipino or not, or what the deal was, but it was like, oh, you're putting on an accent here and it sounds really strange.
How cool is it to have the
What a
option though, to
shame.
be like put it in Tagalog and then read and have the English subtitles? Like,
Oh
how
no, that
cool is
was
it to have
so
that
cool,
option?
being able to choose. I was like, I can watch it in Filipino, what?
I do kind of wonder though why they chose to also have a Japanese version, and whether that was just primarily catered to like, oh, it's an anime, therefore it must have a Japanese version.
Ben, you know what I find really
There's
funny?
a French one too,
If-
right?
There's a French one?
Is there?
Well,
I would have watched the French one if there was a French one. It didn't show up on my Netflix.
Yeah, on my Netflix, this is what I find funny. The language options are Filipino, that's the default, English, Spanish, and Chinese and Japanese. So it's
Oh.
Filipino and our 3 colonizers.
Well, I get the English and Spanish, especially for Netflix and for a US audience, is kind of a given. The Japanese one struck me as kind of, I guess I understand why they did it, because they're billing it as an anime, but just seems kind of, we'll throw this in there to cater to the weebs.
But also in Japan, wouldn't most people just be used to, you know, specifically for the Japan market? Trisha lives in
I
Japan,
mean,
so
I live in Japan, and in all honesty, I don't know how much of a Japanese market there is. Like when I was
the
looking,
Japanese Netflix market.
the Japanese Netflix market, because my Netflix is Japanese. So when I was looking for Trese, I actually had to search it. Like it didn't come up as new release. It didn't come up as, trending now. It didn't come up as any of that. So I don't think there's a very wide exposure here in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. Like the people that I know in Japan who have watched it because I told them to watch it. So like I don't know that there's very much exposure here. So it's interesting that they would have chosen Japanese as one of the languages that they're dubbing it in, because it doesn't seem like there's really any interest here as far as I can tell.
Kyle, you ruined the English for Maya.
I'm sorry.
I watched the first episode in Tagalog and that was good. And then I watched the second one in English, and Kyle had incepted me into thinking they sounded Mexican, and then that's all I could hear. So the second episode onwards, but then I stuck to English because I found it a little bit easier. It was just faster to watch. And so I stuck to English, and after a while it stopped bothering me so much. So I think I got used to it. But yes, in the beginning it was annoying. And it sounded like they were putting on the accents. It was a little bit fake. I appreciated that Alexandra was just an English, like an American accent. And
You appreciated that she
try.
didn't even try?
The
Yeah,
thing is, I
she didn't
wonder,
try.
would it have been better if none of them tried? Like if it was
Yeah,
just
this
I
was
agree.
straight
my
up,
my
like,
genuine
regular
question
English accent.
for regular anime. Do they even try to do an accent? Like the background characters, do they all speak like in a slightly Japanese accent? They don't, right?
I don't.
So this seemed like
Some
kind
of-
of trying to add a little extra something to feel more in the location.
What
Some
they
of them
should
were
have done is just
fun.
have them all in a room, and then naturally their accents would have gravitated.
That's actually true.
And that's
That
the
would've-
thing, because that's how
That's how
film
accents come
work,
out.
right? Like you're
Yeah.
with like people who speak Tagalog, and suddenly your accent starts to like slowly just like resurface.
But that's also not how you record animation. It's one person isolated by themselves, one at a time.
So
that's
I'm
why
so
it's
glad
probably
Kat
harder.
said that, because for everyone's background, everyone watching this, Catherine works in animation and works with voice actors. And what is your take on all this, Kat?
It didn't bother me as much as other people did. Also, it's interesting. I was like, with Trisha and Maya, haven't lived in the US for a little bit, and I live in LA, where I'm surrounded by lots of Filipinos who don't speak Tagalog. And so I definitely know people that have like no accent or very slight accents or like 25 years removed from their accents. And so it didn't really bother me because I hear people that talk like that and it's okay. But also that I can hear a little bit of the Mexican thing, but I feel like it's a natural thing that happens when you try to do an accent with no context, or like when you're kind of by yourself or you're not imitating someone. I think it might be a unique thing to the Filipino accent. It's maybe that and like maybe an Indian accent or maybe a few others, where if you try to do it without speaking the language, it sounds like too comedic, or it's like it's too pushed and exaggerated. And if you try to do it naturally or say something seriously, and that's not the way you normally talk, it can feel weird or it feels unnatural.
Do you ever have these kinds of experiences working with people with accents?
Yeah, and I mean, looking at the cast, a lot of them are Filipino, but I appreciate that Netflix went for Filipino actors that people know, like Manny Jacinto and Darren Criss. Everyone loves them. So
wait, is it actually pronounced Jacinto? It's not Jacinto?
I've heard them say Jacinto, but maybe I am wrong.
Yeah, they say Jacinto here. Some Filipinos will.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
Yeah, but I forgot what I was saying. What was it?
So,
What
you were
was the
saying
question?
that they got actors that people knew.
Yeah, no, that was cool, and I hope they continue to do that and get more exposure for Filipino actors, because there are Filipino actors out there. They're just not yet super mainstream, except for that handful. But I think it's hard to ask someone to do an accent, even if they're from that nationality, because sometimes this is just how they talk. And I was telling Jose previously about I had an experience. Sorry. We had an experience working with Priyanka Chopra, who is Indian, but she doesn't really have an Indian accent. And it felt offensive to ask her to do an Indian accent, because when she's speaking, this is how she talks. And if you say like, could you sound a little more Indian? She's like, I am Indian. This is my accent. So it's a weird fine line you have to tread sometimes.
Yeah.
But this is the exact opposite of that, where they're talking to people who probably don't have an accent and they're asking them to put on an accent. On the other hand, though, they're probably asked to do accents that aren't Filipino a lot of the time. So maybe it feels nice to have been asked to do a Filipino accent. I don't know.
But I mean, I feel like it's like asking us to do a Filipino accent. Like we're all, part Filipino or like full Filipino. But if you say, hey, everyone, talking to Filipino accent now, it's gonna sound super weird because
Gonna
it's
sound
not how we
ridiculous. Yeah.
like,
not
okay,
something you
I'll
put
just
on
turn it
video.
on. Like,
Yeah, I can't do it on command. Like
Yeah.
it has to naturally come out depending on who I'm talking to.
I also
Kim,
wonder though,
can you
just
do
how
it?
much of it is just a matter of practice, because you'll get British actors doing American accents and
Right.
vice versa. So it's not
and
like
that's
you
their job.
can't do a forced but like natural sounding Filipino accent.
But I wonder if it's because it's not common to ask.
Yeah,
someone
I just don't think it's
Filipino
common.
accent, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of voice actors just haven't had the opportunity to practice Filipino accents, and so
Right.
when put on the spot, it just sounds really forced.
So the solution would be to get these actors and their mom in the same recording booth.
Yes.
Basically, yes, because we all
Yeah.
sound more Filipino when we talk to our moms.
Just have their mom talk at them for an hour and then start recording.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's why it's like you can do your best accent if you're imitating your mom, right? So, but then you sound like you're making fun of her, and then it seems sort of disrespectful.
And then you get in trouble and it's like, oh no.
You just have your mom in the recording booth.
I think Kyle was going to say something.
For me, it was the background actors that sounded more authentically Filipino to me. It was the main actors who sounded a little off. Most of them. I think Hank did a really good job.
Hank did a really good job. Yeah.
There were times
is
where his
good.
accent seemed to have disappeared, but overall, like it was great. And I thought Jobert was pretty good too. It was a little exaggerated.
Jobert was a
but-
little too much for me.
Yeah, he was a little exaggerated, but that's what you do in animation when you're a voice actor. You exaggerate. Like you have to exaggerate to get some of those emotions out. Or
He's the computer guy, right?
yeah, he's the
Mm.
computer
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah,
And
that's why, because he
Gilbert
was a
was
more
pretty good.
comedic character too.
Yeah.
So it was like that
Yeah.
makes sense for it to feel
It
more
makes sense.
exaggerated.
It fit.
Yeah.
I thought Maliksi was good. He didn't annoy me.
Is that the reason you thought Maliksi was good?
I thought his voice was fine.
Oh yeah,
Uh-huh.
yeah, it was his voice, I'm sure.
Yeah, sure.
Hold on, just a side note on Maliksi. I think it's interesting that, like, remember when the two wind creatures were talking about him and describing him? Did everybody catch that little when they were like, describe him, please? Well, he's like this. And I'm like, oh my God, did they really just put that in there? Like
What did
this
it say?
motion. Did you, none of you caught that? Am I
Oh,
watch it? And I was just like, are they making a comment about something about his anatomy? Just like,
It's
okay,
foot size.
sure.
I mean,
But it was just like,
Tail.
No, but it's things like that that I really appreciated. There was one scene, and I forgot what episode it was, where I think it was Guerrero or somebody else. They pointed with their mouth, which is super
Yes.
Filipino.
yeah.
I think it was the Kambal. I think it was,
Yeah,
it was one of the
it was the
Kambal, yeah.
Kambal.
Yeah.
so
But-
y-
again, and that's another form of language, right? The physical, unspoken, and they did pick up on a lot of the Filipino, like the pointing with the mouth is like one thing. We talk with our hands, all that stuff. You know?
You really want to know what we're saying? Look at what our hands are doing.
Yes, yeah.
I think that more than the setting made me feel like it was the Philippines.
Mm.
It was those things.
yeah, the small details. Because what I was saying to somebody the other day was, you can have anybody can research the big things like what the skyline looks like or whatever, but it's the small things like pointing with your lips, bawal umihi dito,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Taho vendors,
the whole
The whole
vendor.
vendors,
pandesal in the morning.
Yeah, the pandesal where it's stale, but it's still from the best like
Yeah.
pandesal.
And the fact that he bought it for the kids of Tapia, I think that's like a very, like, you do that for, you know, your coworkers' kids.
Well, and he doesn't ever say that it's pandesal either. I think
Right,
it was
I
like
just
one of those
assumed.
things where like we see it and we're like, oh, it's pandesal. Like that's what you would buy at that time
it
of the
was
morning.
breakfast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's breakfast.
Because it's umaga, right? That's what
yeah,
you do.
right.
We were
No, I
talking
really-
about the skylines earlier, and for me it was the interiors and the interactions and those little details that I think stuck out more for me. Those are the things that made me feel nostalgic
Yeah,
more
for-
than seeing the city.
For me, it was most specifically it was a shot of her in the carinderia with
Yes.
with the monoblock chairs.
Yes. Yeah. The chairs are a good touch. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
And you're just expecting some terrible radio song to come on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was right.
That,
From
that is something that I
Terrible.
felt was missing, the cheesy power ballads.
the cheesy power ballads.
I was
Oh, yes,
expecting that.
That
I was expecting a little bit more of that.
Not
Little,
in
a
the
little
budget.
Bon Jovi, a
The
little
Michael
Learns to Rock.
Or
Michael
even
learns
Michael
to
learns to rock.
the-
Air Supply.
Air Supply.
even the Pinoy ballads, you know, like you
Yeah.
got there's like, you know.
like April Boys and all those Eraserheads. Well, Eraserheads really.
That
Not
that,
really
that particular scene was when Maliksi comes back to talk to her, and I just
Mhm.
want to know, this is the most popular ship for Alexandra. Who's on board this ship? No one.
I
No
could
one's on
see
the
it.
Malik ship.
I don't think anyone else would fit really if they want to do a like romantic
But like
interest.
it's
for
not
her.
necessary. Like it
Yeah.
feels
Yeah.
like stupid to even like ship anything in this. Like why does she need a romantic interest? Like what?
Yeah.
Some
Right,
people are
I
shipping her
agree.
and the emissary of death.
Still
That's
same
weird.
argument.
If it happens, it
She
happens.
can be with whoever she wants. However, same argument. Why is that a thing? Is it
Yeah.
because
Yeah,
she's a woman?
I'm-
like
I agree
You
with
know?
Trisha. I'm really glad that there wasn't any romantic subplot to the story because I just like the idea of having a female protagonist that doesn't need to have a relationship in order to be
exactly.
a full-fledged, well-fleshed out character.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think the Kambals joke around about the soldier guy, right? The
Marco.
nephew of this Marco, about
Yeah.
like, yo, he's calling you kayo ha, you know, like making those typical Filipino jokes about like, you know. He wants your
Yeah.
number.
I mean, we do
If
that.
anything happens for her, I don't think it should be a main part of the story. Like a
Right, yeah,
small
I agree
side
with that.
story, not even a side story, like a mention. Like just mention it, hint at it. But I mean, we've already seen that story a million times before. We don't need it again.
No.
Very, very quickly, Marco Guerrero is not a character from the comics. He was created specifically for the show, since you mentioned Marco.
Ah.
He's created
For Darren
specifically for
Criss.
the show, specifically, apparently for Darren Criss, so we can expect probably that he's going to be a bigger character moving forward. Captain
As long as
Guerrero,
he's not the romantic interest, because we don't need that.
I think Captain Guerrero dies specifically so that Marco can be the next captain.
To step in.
I think so.
Okay.
We're gonna have to do that really well though, because that's a poor replacement. Just saying.
How did Captain Guerrero's dying hit the land with you guys?
I was
That
really
was a
bummed
nice
about
shot
it.
with the flag, like the shadow of the mast of the flag going through him. That was well done, I think. It's one of
Not
those
like
nice
the-
imagery things.
Like the way they took the story, they needed something like that to happen for her to do something. But it did kind of seem a little bit Deus Ex Machina in that
I
sense.
was like, oh, he's dead. That was
Well, there were a lot of parts in the last episode that I felt were just questionable.
Mhm.
And one of the things that just to me made no sense, and this goes to the whole piece of them trying to cram too much into 6 episodes, was the whole San Telmo piece. Like there was no explanation as to why she had a fireball in her Nokia 5150.
Her cell phone. Yeah.
Santelmo was one of the mythological creatures that I was completely unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
And I was
It's just
so confused as to why he came out of a cell phone.
I
I
think
really like that she has him available to her, and
Oh, I
that he
didn't-
and that
I-
they built.
No, but
in
there's
that
no
he has
explanation
been
of
her
it.
friend.
yeah.
It was just
I
confusing.
liked him, but there's
They
just
had that
no explanation.
flashback where she's
Yeah.
talking to him as a child, right? So they've known each other since they were kids, or since she was a kid. And so they have now this link through the phone where she dials in the date of the fire.
the great beyond the fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then he like comes to help her every time. I think it's awesome.
You know what the most
Yeah, it's
unrealistic
cool.
part of the show is? The fact that the Nokia broke.
Well, it did
It
explode.
didn't have, because those are made of
No.
titanium.
How will she replace
But I guess,
it?
did she have the same phone since she was a kid? Or
details
Could be,
can-
it could be, right?
I'm pretty
or
sure that
can
if we tried to
Santalmo
turn on,
transfer, it's like data transfer when you transfer from your old phone to your new phone. Like would he carry over?
He's in the cloud and she just puts him into the next phone that she gets.
But the
Like, not a
cloud-
problem.
That kind of Nokia is what we were using like 20 years
that
ago.
kind of
so
Nokia
that's
is
what she had when she was a
indestructible.
kid.
I completely believe that was the original phone.
Yeah, I mean,
Come
she's,
on.
Yeah.
she's
It was
about
a
our
brick.
age, right? She's about our age. I
Yeah,
mean,
exactly. Like I feel like if we
Just-
still had our Nokia phones from back in the day, they would still be working.
yeah,
But it was
absolutely.
set in
She's
the
our
early
age.
They were,
2000s,
100%.
wasn't it? Because the comic was based in the early 2000s. So I get that they were using the Nokias back then, but
No,
if you were
everyone else in the show has a smartphone, so I think it's set in the modern day, and she just happens to
Oh.
have a Nokia.
So yeah, it probably was the same phone.
I don't think
Well,
she's our age.
my
I think
question
she's
was
probably like
answered.
30, right?
Right, our
But
age.
it was,
Cat.
it was a little confusing
age.
for me.
Shut up,
I was
Kat.
like,
The-
Only 30.
We're 30.
We're
The
30.
timeline for me felt a little bit weird because I didn't know how much time had passed since she came out of the tree. I would
Mm.
assume there would have to be some amount
I
because
think they said
when she
5
went
years.
in-
yeah, they said 5 years.
Okay, because
She was in
when
the
she
tree
went
for
in,
5 years.
she was not on good terms with the twins, and then like during the actual setting of the story, they're like best buddies. So obviously something had to have happened where they actually good terms.
In between her coming out of the tree and the start of the show, I don't know
Yeah,
how long.
How
that
long
was.
was that?
That's the
Yeah,
question.
how long
I don't
was
know how long
that?
that was.
Because I don't think that the moment she got out, it was automatically, oh yeah, we're best buds, we're a team Trese, right?
I think it was in the comic it's
True.
3 years, I think.
3 years, okay.
But
Yeah.
so I have a funny story about her coming out of the tree. So that whole episode, turns out my brother knows the guy Hank is based on. And I know the guy Hank is based on, but we know him from two different things. So we were talking about Hank, and we're like, that's not Hank. This is Hank. Blah 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 blah. Then she comes out of the tree, and Hank's there to greet her. And my mom goes, "Who's that?" And we're like, "That's Hank." It's like, which one is Hank? I was like, we were just been talking about Hank for the last 10 minutes. What is Trese's most powerful weapon? Is it the Sinag blade or is it her Nokia?
Nokia, 100%.
Nokia. Yeah.
Nokia.
Of
course.
Always.
I am glad they took Santelmo out for the last one, for the last bit, because that was a little bit of a nuclear bomb every time she brings them out. So here's my question about the voice acting, going back to it really quickly. Should it be changed in season 2? Should they just not bother with the accents? Or is it, I can see the
It could be improved.
trying.
It could be improved.
I don't think they should change anyone out in terms of actors, because I mean, while the accents did bother me, I don't think the acting was bad. And you do get used to it.
Yeah,
So,
you get used to it. So I think it was okay. I think they should keep it for season 2, but
I think the longer they go at it, the better they'll get just
They'll get at
naturally
it.
by
Yeah, I agree.
actors.
I agree.
I mean, I think it's still like it wasn't perfect. I think that's what we're all there, and I don't think it was like super awful right to the point. And I respect the fact that I'm sure that they took particular care in making sure that they didn't mock the Filipino accent, which is like good for me. Like there wasn't a trying too hard to make it so that to the point that it sounds funny when you hear it, that you just like start to burst out laughing. And I think it's just the accents that they might improve on. And I also appreciate that they didn't like just use cheap speech patterns in order for it to sound authentic, So there was still I think a very good effort in putting forward like, okay, these people are from the Philippines, this is their language, and that's how they do it. And I mean, linked to what Kat was saying about like, Filipinos speak Filipino and English in different ways, depending on educational background, depending on how you're exposed to the language and all that stuff. So I think that's good. That it's a right step, and I hope they can improve. But I don't know. I don't think we talked about this. Like when people listen to it in Filipino, specifically Alexandra, I think as a native speaker, I found some of her speech patterns like interesting, like her choice of words, I guess, and how she like phrased things and sequenced her sentences. But maybe it's like a different nuance if you'd spoken the language. Sometimes I hear her speak and it's like, why didn't she just say it this way?
We would say it differently.
In Filipino, I think I had some moments like that. And I don't know if that can be like reconciled, whatever, but it's just something that I thought was interesting. Like, I think it's like economy of terms is like another thing that I like think about a lot. It's like using less words to bring your point across, whatever. But sometimes like you don't say things like that in Tagalog. Like sometimes I think like that, right, Jose? Like
It's like when she says itim na mahika, which literally means black magic. Except nobody would actually say itim na mahika. They would just say black magic.
Yeah.
Just items like that, yeah.
On a similar note, for the English translation, my issue is more with the script more than the voice acting, where a lot of the gods or a lot of the monsters and creatures spoke kind of the same way, like especially the gods, like they used the same words to speak to Alexandra. And it was just weird. It was like, we've already heard this.
There's
but
a
it was
storm
from a
coming.
different
They say
character.
that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, but it wasn't just there's a storm coming. It was like their entire way of speaking to her was exactly the same. And it kind of took away from the different personalities that they could have had or the different characters they could have been. So that was my issue with it.
I think going back to Kim's point a bit, one of the issues maybe was that it is written for English, so it was animated for English. So maybe they had to come up with a script to make sure that the Tagalog would fit into the thing. Yeah, I think the main criticism of the voice acting has been for Alexandra, but a part of me is wondering how much of that is because she's a famous actress here, and it's
I think she did fine.
So let me tell you guys something. If you knew going into Batman the Animated Series that the Joker was being voiced by Mark Hamill, would that have bothered you?
No.
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 Nothing would be like, what? That's Luke Skywalker.
I
No.
would have. I would have been like, isn't he Luke Skywalker? I think I would have thought about it.
Would you have been able to unhear Luke Skywalker immediately?
I
Mm,
think so.
Yeah, he doesn't really sound like Luke
That-
Skywalker from Batman.
That voice
The
is
Joker, especially, that's a pretty
Yeah.
extreme voice he does.
Yeah.
What about Oza?
I tend to get really impressed with voice actors that can do that kind of stuff, because like there are some that voice multiple iconic characters, like Winnie the Pooh and Darkwing Duck are the same voice. But I tend to like not get hung up on it. And hear Winnie the Pooh, I just get excited that he can do both.
Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck, same guy.
Isn't Winnie the Pooh also
Tigger, he's also Tigger, so he's
Tigger.
talking to himself a lot.
yeah, and okay. So that's for
I did hear Rufio for a
Yeah.
second there. I was like,
Yes.
I was gonna say, so speaking of voice actors who will use the same voice every time, Dante Bosco saying,
Dante Bosco. It
I'm
said
okay
like
with
5
that.
words. And I was like, that's Dante
Yeah,
Bosco.
it's like
I
you
heard
knew
Zuko, not
immediately.
Rufio.
I'm okay with that.
Do you hear
Zuko,
Zuko do you hear Zuko or Rufio?
I heard
I guess I hear
Zuko
both
because
of
even what he
them.
was saying was quite Zuko. Like he was here to avenge his father.
Defend the honor of
Hey.
his father.
He's just
They're
got one of those
exactly
voices where it's like it fits. Like,
And
It
yet,
fits
yeah,
with the characters he plays.
and
Yeah.
you can tell it's him through the static too.
Yeah. 100%.
Aren't you sad that he was only in it for like 5 minutes?
Yes.
He'll come back, right?
We get
He'll come
we
back.
No,
get
he's
what
dead.
we can, you
Pretty
know.
sure he's dead, Cat. I don't think he's coming
Flashbacks.
back. I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's done.
They do this thing with
Well-
computers now. They bring people back to life.
So this next question is because of a conversation I was having with Trisha. How much does the folklore need to be spelled out for an international audience? Like, does there need to be more exposition of explaining
think
what types
it's-
of monsters they are? Or...
I don't think they need to explain anything. I think they just tell the story, and through the story, the audience will be able to decipher what
Yeah.
what the intentions
Yeah.
are and what the
You
personalities
get
are
it.
of these different characters.
Yeah, I
I
think you get it
disagree.
through the context.
Trisha,
I
I-
try
because
to
I-
think.
I don't have a lot of background in the different monsters. I mean, I know them from watching some TV in the Philippines and from my mom, but I don't know all the details on them. And I for me, it was perfectly fine not to have a big, a tikbalan is this, blah, 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 from here, blah, 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 blah. That's fine. You see them, you see the story, and that's, if you want to Google it for more details. But I don't think they should do any voiceover or background.
I mean, like
Yeah.
San Telmo confused me because I had no idea, but I think, just a passing comment on what he is, one sentence would have been fine. But it was also okay that I had no idea what he was and that I had to Google it. That's fine too. Like,
The thing
I,
is,
I
you
like
know,
to think of it like Supernatural or something like that show where it's a monster of the week and every week they fight something different and they don't spend a lot of time like this is this guy and he means this to this region. It's sort of like they meet him and they're like, oh, what the hell is that? And then they fight it and they sort of like learn more about it in the storytelling. I like that kind of style rather than like needing to go into a lot of detail. I like it being discovered along the way.
I think Jose and I talked about this, though, that it is in many ways a Western privilege that many of the monsters they fight in Supernatural are part of Western folklore. And as much as we want to deny it, the fact of the matter is Western folklore is so much more pervasive around the world than Filipino folklore is. So I'm not saying that they had to have a long exposition of what this is and what that is and what this is, but some sort of, and it didn't even have to necessarily be in the dialogue. I mean, like in the comics, they have it after. Like the explanation comes in the form of just an explanation that came after like the actual comic to say like, this is what this is. And yes, there is that idea that if you're really interested, you're going to go and research on it. But the fact of the matter is we all have we're invested in it in some way because it is our culture. So we'll say, I don't really understand this, so I'm going to go off and I'm going to research it. But if you're not invested, then do you take the time? And if we want this to be palatable to an international audience, in the sense that we want it to be successful and we want it to go out into the world and have other people appreciate what Filipino culture is it really that much to ask to have a little bit of background? Like, I'm not saying change it. I'm not saying add in, big exposition or whatever, but even just having at the beginning or at the ending of an episode saying, this is what a duende is, or like, this is what this is. And I don't think that takes away from it. I don't think that it harms the show. It may not add anything for us, but if you're talking to a more international audience, does it add it for them? Like, I feel like it does. Like, if you understand what these creatures are meant to be or what our connection to them is, then it automatically makes what you're watching more, I guess, comprehensive to you.
Yeah.
And again,
I think it'd be cool to have that as a special feature, like an extra special feature, not part of the episode, but like the Netflix extras, where they go into like little mini stories about who
did
these
have the
I think
after
it
show.
would have been good to just include in the closing credits of each episode, because I mean, she had this big library full of stuff about magic and monsters and stuff like that. You could just have it be, maybe like pages from like a bestiary or something like that, and given a little bit of explanation. Because I kind of agree, Trisha, with what you're saying. Like, having a little bit more context would be great for audiences who want to learn a little bit more. But I also don't want it necessarily in the main storyline
right,
itself.
no, I'm not saying put in like a tikbalan is, but like having either as like a beginning or an ending, just a little bit more information, and people who aren't interested can just skip over it. It's like, okay, I don't want to read this. Like, I'm just going to go to the next episode.
And that's why, to me, the closing credits would have been the perfect spot to do something like that.
I like that idea. Put it in the closing credits.
Like
But
a
in
little
the
file.
story,
Yeah, like
that
just like a
could've
little
worked.
like picture,
Yeah.
like this is what it is. Here's like a little bit of background on it. And I think that also entices people to want to know more. Like, if you give just a snippet of what this is meant to be, if somebody's really interested in it, they're going to go look up more and they're going to go find out more. Like, I mean, that's what happened to me, right? So like, I don't know. Like, that's my perspective.
Had this show been like a normal syndicated, like on TV thing, it'd be really cool to do it like how some animes or how some video games do it. Like, in between commercial breaks, they would have like little informational things.
Yeah.
Like, they have it in Death Note, they have it in My Hero Academia, they always show this is their power or whatever, or like in cutscenes in video games, or when there's a loading screen, there's a tutorial at the bottom. So something like that is kind of nice. But I know that it's a Netflix show and there are no ads. But I agree with like some, maybe a little bit of explanation, maybe either through something like that, or like even contextually, just drop in hints like, oh, well, that Capres smoke a lot of tobacco. It's like little comments like that.
I much prefer it to be, like you said, woven into the story.
Mm-hmm.
Be clever at how you disperse the information.
Did they not do that enough, though? Did they not do that enough in the show?
I think they did fine. I mean, you don't need to know everything about all the monsters and all the
I've
creatures.
spoken to somebody who has no Filipino background at all, and it wasn't enough. So like, I think
personally
we take into account the fact that we do already have background. So it's like, for us, maybe it was enough. But if you have nothing,
like the vagueness of it, because depending on which region in the Philippines you're in, the stories are very different from each other. Like, the stories that my mom would tell me as a kid are different from the stories that my cousins would tell me who lived in a different part of the Philippines.
The thing is, you had
stories that I heard in school.
But you had stories, so you
similar,
have an idea
but what I'm saying
they're
is
meant to be.
yes.
It's
But what I'm
similar
saying is,
to
I like the vagueness. Sorry, go ahead.
To what Kyle is saying, like, there are multiple war gods in the Philippines, depending on where you're actually from. It is not inconceivable for her to just randomly fight another war god in the next season, which has nothing to do with the Lagbusao at all.
Right, but then are you saying that an international audience is not going to be like, wait, but she already fought that war god? Like, I mean, that's the thing. Like, there is a culture that we have, and it is complicated and different across provinces. Like we're all from different provinces and we all have different dialects, different ideas of what these monsters are. But for people who don't have that idea of just how, I guess, diverse the Philippines is, even though we're all Filipino, if you did introduce another war god in the second season, I feel like an international audience would be like, but she already killed the war god. Like what's going on here? Like, I mean, I just think that we come from it from a perspective of people who maybe were not as informed as others, because we do have kind of a different background, but we are informed in some ways.
Let's paint for our viewers how diverse the Philippines is. Kim and I can speak Tagalog. Four of you can understand Tagalog and another Filipino language. Ben, can you understand another Filipino language?
No, not really. I'm probably the least Filipino out of all of us, which is why I had no idea who that Electro character was, other than the fact that he was basically Electro. And he was in the Meralco building, which kind of made sense.
So his name was Electric Storm.
I honestly had no idea. I was like, is that really a character from Filipino folklore? Or I had no idea. I kind of recognized everybody else, like where they were coming from, but Electro was like, huh?
Well, you would have benefited from some closing credit explanation then.
Yeah, it might have been helpful to have some closing credit explanation. Yeah.
But I think the way you wrangle that, like, you know, the whole like variations in stories, narratives, etc., is you know, just the world building aspect of it is exciting. Like, I think like to establish certain, like, in this world, capres are this, duendes are this, and all that stuff. You know, I would like to see where that goes. Because again, it's like I saw all of these like cool creatures like in the meeting at the end. I was like, oh my god, that's a shokoi, and just started giggling because, you know, it's something I haven't thought about in such a long time. And the concept of a shokoi is like it's in different cultures, but in this particular context, it's a shokoi from the Philippines, and I know it because it's set in the Philippines. And the same about, like, yes, the privilege of knowing that is cool, but at the same time, it's like I am excited to see where this world like establishes and links in all these characters.
I agree about the world building, because when they showed that shot of all of them at the tree, all the different characters, I didn't recognize most of them, and I was like, oh cool, so when are they going to get into these guys? And I don't need to know like right away, and it feels
you
like
didn't
a tease,
giggle
and then
when
you
you
get
saw
more
shokoi?
information
Come
later.
on,
I don't know
what's
what's a shokoi.
What's a shokoi?
But to
Now you can Google it.
I think
I will.
I think
I'll
world
do that.
building is really. I think that the people who made the show had a big challenge in trying to build a fully fleshed out world in just 6 episodes. And I totally agree with Trisha. Like, sometimes it would be really helpful to have a little bit more context and background, but at the same time, there are trade-offs to be made in terms of what you actually want to convey and what's critical. And I think that they made the deliberate choice to say, let's leave some of these things out simply because there are other elements of the plot that are more important to focus on.
I guess how important is that to an international audience, though? Like, I mean, when you're talking about marketability and you're talking about sustainability, we have to talk outside of the Filipino like ethnicity, right? So does it make it more marketable to explain more? Does it make it less marketable? Like, what's the line, and where do we say, here's where we can make these concessions, and here's where we're not going to explain it to you? You know, like,
it's an interesting new problem. I feel like the intrigue is good though, isn't it? If you don't fully understand it, it's kind of like
problem to have.
I like.
To me, I think the importance of the background and context is really how well related it is to the plot. Like, is it something that's interesting and nice to know versus something that's like core to the storyline? And so if you knew all the background around like what aswangs are, or what duendes are, like, is that an integral part of the plot? Because similarly, like, everybody kind of knows about like vampires and zombies, right? You don't need to know like the ins and outs of like shooting a zombie in the head is the way to kill it, because you'll figure that out as part of the plot, right? You don't need to know like all the ins and outs about like the history of zombies to kind of get that they're bad guys.
Yeah.
So,
I'll use a different example then. Like, I watch a lot of anime, I already said this, but my favorite thing to tell people is like, if you want to know something about a specific topic, watch a Japanese anime about it, because I did not know anything about volleyball and I watched Haikyuu, and they
Now
explain
you're a volleyball
everything.
expert.
Watch any
Yeah.
sports anime. Like, I know too much about figure skating because of Yuri on Ice.
Yes.
Like, they explain things, but everything that they explain, like Ben was saying, was linked to the story. It's like, why does Yuri need to do a triple salchow into, why does he need to land that landing? Why does the music need to be perfect? All of these is contextually explained and linked to what is going on in the story. And I think they can take lessons from that.
I think
You can
if
explain
they're going
something
to
ad
do that, they
nauseum.
need to do it more. Like, I don't
Yeah.
think they did it enough in these episodes. Like, I think that if that's the way to go, not that it needs to be spelled out, but there needs to be a little bit more
Yeah.
thought given to that.
The way that I looked at it, though, is I looked at it as an introduction. So, and in an intro, you don't give away all the details. You give out what's relevant. And like Ben was saying, you know, what's critical to the story that you have to tell in 6 episodes, which isn't a lot. And I'm also looking at it at from the perspective of how does this compare to an American comic book or comic cartoon? You know, you'll see a lot of villains show up and they don't explain what their powers are. They just do stuff and you put it together, you know, or new heroes show up and you don't know what they do. They don't go into the backgrounds of everyone there. So I think it's totally doable. But I mean, I don't disagree that there could be more information, but I don't think that they did it wrong in terms of how much information they presented.
No, I'm not saying they did it wrong. I'm just saying it's something to think about.
I'll tell you
Especially
what.
if you're trying
I
to
think it's
a wider
a
audience.
yeah, because I think it's a stylistic choice that they made in terms of the direction of the show, because you could have just spent the entire 6 episodes focused on just one demon monster, right? Instead of doing one monster per episode.
Yeah.
And I can see the pros and cons of doing it in either direction. I think they probably made the deliberate choice to try and focus on covering as many different types of monsters as possible to give the variety and say this is how cool and diverse Filipino folklore is, as opposed to spending all of their time focused on one particular monster and really flushing that out. And I think it's a question of like breadth versus depth in this case, because you only have a limited amount of time. Like, do you want to focus on showing the variety or showing the depth? And I think that they chose the variety, and that's not necessarily the wrong choice. I think it's just something where there are pros and cons to each of the approaches.
I'll
The
tell you
hope is
what.
there will be more seasons, right? So that
That's it.
they can get into
Hopefully.
it more.
Well, that's the whole thing. Is like if they didn't explain and it doesn't get to other people and like people who like it reaches outside the demographic, is there going to be another season? Like, I think that was my
It
more
went into
my
the top
concern.
10. It went into the top 10 in the US and Canada for like a day. So
Did it? I
I-
didn't see it.
I think that's a good
For
barometer.
some reason, it never showed up
It-
on my front
It
page.
finally
never showed
showed
up.
up on in trending now over here. So
here either.
it's picking up. No, it showed up in
It
trending
is
now.
Oh, it
showing
showed
in
up for you.
Singapore.
It didn't show up
Yeah.
here. Didn't show up here.
Oh, also it is
there-
in the top 10 in countries like the UAE, which
Ooh.
guess why?
Well, the UAE is because of all of the
All
It's all of the Filipinos who live in the UAE.
It's all the W's watching it.
I mean, to be fair, we're all over the place. So like really,
That's
They're all
true,
over the
yeah.
place.
Yeah.
But so
There's one thing that's I thought was really cool is the casualness that she approached everything to. It's like, oh look, there's a duende. Of course there is. It's
Yeah.
like it's just part of her normal life. Like, oh, there's a dead white lady. It's not like, what? It's sort of like, damn, another day.
It's her again.
again.
I love that all of the spells are in Tagalog. That's
Yeah, that's
I
what you
appreciate-
lose,
even in
right?
Japanese. She speaks in Tagalog to say, and it's kind of funny to hear somebody say like, how does it go? Sa mata ng iba,
kaluluwa. Sa
mga
mata ng
lihim
iba.
magpapakita in different like accents. It's great, but I love it that they
sa
kept
mata
that.
ng iba.
Sa mata ng iba, mga lihim magpapakita.
That threw me off when she started casting spells. I was like,
But I thought it was cool because I'm like, I remember all of those shows like Buffy where all of the spells are in Latin. So
Yeah,
that's
same
what
thing.
you lose if you watch this in the Filipino version.
Well, that was the weird thing in the Filipino one, though. It's because like they're speaking Tagalog and then the spells are in Tagalog and
Yeah.
it suddenly stops translating and you're like,
Can I ask why there was that Latin phrase that they kept saying over and over?
I
Yeah,
can't.
Why was that
they
fair?
switched it?
I can't answer this. In the comic, it's the Philippine national
Because-
anthem.
Because
Yeah.
they teach Latin as
Yeah.
part of the core curriculum in school.
In National Bilibid Prison.
No, in grade school, right? Don't they? In high school, don't you? Doesn't
No.
everybody?
No, didn't we all go to the same high school?
No, Mark.
Maybe they
Mark
did.
Were
went.
you in,
Remember when Mark
were
went
you in some
to?
secret Latin class, Kyle?
Did you go to some secret
They
Latin
just like
class we didn't
indoctrinated you.
They teach it at Ateneo, don't they? I'm pretty sure they do.
I think it's in order to like understand some of the biblical text and do
Like,
that.
all my Filipino friends who didn't go to school with us, they learned Latin in high school.
Oh, weird, because mine
Weird.
didn't.
It wasn't in our curriculum, and my brother went to the same Catholic school I went to before going to the school we went to, and he didn't have to do Latin.
Yeah,
my
brother
parents had to
have
do
it.
Spanish in college. That's
Yeah,
about
so
it.
did my mom.
Yeah.
No, in the comic, and I completely understand why they didn't do this. The
Yeah.
the bombers sing the Philippine national anthem.
I think
Oh.
they just couldn't. They couldn't do the anthem because that would have been
Too long.
kind
Yeah.
of negatively
They needed
received.
they needed space
So-
for the 10-minute monologue.
What's a good filler is Latin.
But
I
they
guess.
could have used a Filipino phrase or even an English phrase instead of something in Latin. That's
Yeah,
just
the
some-
Latin did seem a
True.
little bit random. Like,
It felt very out
where'd that
of
come
place.
from?
It's
Yeah.
like this Latin war god that doesn't look Latin,
So
doesn't look European.
we're talking about spelling things out
Should have
versus
used dialect. Should have used something in dialect.
Wow. Wait,
But
wait.
then Maya, which dialect though?
Time out.
Which dialect
Before,
is the demon war god?
Which
Time out.
where's it from?
time out. Before we go to that, I want to say we're talking about encouraging people, like having people go Google the monster themselves versus spelling it out for them. We did not use the monster that would totally get people to go Google it themselves. You think an international audience, once they see a manananggal pull their torso out, they're totally looking that up immediately. It doesn't matter
Like
how much.
what?
They should have had a Manananggal in the first. I guess it wasn't in the
Yeah.
comics. First.
Yeah.
Also, it's kind of like a secret weapon, I think, for us.
Oh yeah.
It's for season
not some-
2. It's
That's not
the
something you
hook.
pull out right away.
You don't do that right away because it's like, wait, what? What happened?
You don't want to show all your
Anyway.
cards in the first season.
It's like our biggest card. But speaking of dialects, Maya, the opening intro of the
Opening
show.
credits. Yeah, do you guys want to know what that song is? So after Jose told me that it was in Ifugao, I was like, oh, because I couldn't hear it. They synthesized it into the song. Really garbled. But it is an
Plus,
Ifugao song.
Chances are you were skipping the intros.
I watched it the first time.
I like the
Netflix
intro.
makes
I
it so
thought-
easy.
I thought the art direction in the intro is one of the better ones that I've seen on Netflix.
It's
It was
pretty
pretty
cool.
I did come to appreciate it. But I wanted to Google what that song was because it's an Ifugao song and I could not find it. And it's amazing. You can't like translate to Ifugao from knowing the words even on Google. But I dug up a paper that my Lolo had written on the Alim. And the Alim is the chant where that song comes from. It's one of the intermission songs. And he had translated it to English. So if you want to know, it's actually really short, but if you want to know, the opening credits, the song is about Bugan, the daughter of Dulindinog, and she climbs the baluha tree and she's eating the baluha fruit, which I don't know what that is, but she's eating the fruit. And then Ali Guyon comes along and he's like, hey, Bugan, give me some fruit. And she's like, no, not if you don't have anything to give me in return. And so he takes off his woven backpack, that they have within the province.
As
Takes
you
off his
do.
backpack. and then they're interrupted by Magapi, who comes by, and she's like, oh, Bugan. And they're like, shh, there's nothing to see here. Just wait a few months and we'll see if there's anything to talk about. So there's like some innuendo in the song. But that's all. It's just an intermission song, but it has a nice beat.
I'm trying to
that's the
figure
English
out
translation.
the appropriateness of the lyrics to the show.
Well, I guess it's a tree, climbing into a tree,
That's true.
parallel.
But apparently getting pregnant in the tree. I don't know.
Mm.
It's weird.
Maybe she gave
That's
birth
the
while
plot
in the
twist
tree.
for
She was
the
in there for
second
5
season.
years, you know. She was in
Yeah.
there for 5
5
years.
Things
years
happen.
is enough time. Things
5
happen
years
in
is enough
trees.
time.
Maybe she left her baby in the tree.
The next two questions
too.
are. Oh wait, we were also saying something else about using a dialect for it. So, Talagbasaw is from Bukidnon, which is in Mindanao. So, sorry we can't use the Ifugao dialect for it, Maya.
But they should have used that instead of Latin.
The
I
next
would
two,
have preferred that.
the next two questions are tied together. What could have been improved, and what are you looking for in season 2?
More episodes is what I'm looking for.
What's an
Mm.
ideal
season
number of
2.
episodes? What's an ideal number?
12 to 13.
10.
13
yeah,
makes
10.
sense.
10 is a good number.
I think 10 is like the minimum.
10 minimum.
Sorry, 8
Yeah.
minimum. 10 is like ideal.
That amount gets you into a nice rhythm, sort of like the way the
Yeah.
X-Files would do it, where it's like there's a monster of the week, then we go into the larger mythology, and then we go back to monster of the week for a little bit. And 6, you kind of can't, there's not enough time to do that. But 10, you can interweave it a little bit more.
Yeah. Anything more than 12, and I think that it starts
It
to get
drags.
dragged out too much.
Yeah.
But for a show like Trese, there should be 13 flat.
That's all I'm going for.
I mean, they could do that. I mean, I just
That
want a
would
more
make sense.
I just want a more detailed story rather than
You can have
everything feeling so
Yeah.
rushed.
we can have a 12
Yeah,
episode
I
arc,
agree.
and then the 13th episode can just focus on twins.
If you had 10 to 13 episodes, you could give more details about these creatures without it feeling like it's being dumped on you. You know,
I think
like
my hope
you
is
being
sort of
lectured
like
about it.
some of these characters kind of get casually introduced, and then in later episodes, later seasons, we go deeper into their world. Like she goes into the
Yes.
underworld of like the duendes or whatever to get more
Yeah.
information, and so then it gets sort of fleshed out over time.
Her
But what she was doing in
brothers.
that
I
tree,
want
I
to see her
don't know.
brothers.
Mm. I feel like if
Yeah.
there are more episodes, and there is more of a chance to actually really delve into the folklore of it, right? Like with
Yeah.
6, like, you can't. Like, here's the story, here's what's happening, like go, 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 go. But like with more, then I think maybe some of my issues or complaints about it would easily be rectified, right? Without spelling it out, just having her go and see more of these creatures and where they're from and all that kind of stuff.
Anyone have a particular monster you'd like to see from your childhood stories or anything?
Shokoi. Kidding. I just like saying the word.
I want to see more
But-
capre.
Yes, I agree.
Capre is like one of the main ones. Yeah.
Manananggal for
Okay.
sure. That's the one
Yeah.
that I heard
For
all the
sure.
time.
I'll be
Always
patient.
Maybe like a
about
big
the
boss
lady in the
at some
lake.
point.
I actually do really
Be the
want to see how
mid-season boss.
the world would react to a Manananggal.
Yeah, the Manananggal I think is like a given because that's like the most iconic, I think. Like,
Yeah. And it's the most different from like
yeah.
anything else. You know, I mean, like there's a similarity in terms of the
Vampire.
blood sucking vampire thing.
No, it's like,
Yeah,
how
but
do you
then-
think of
but then
this?
there's-
Like, yeah, you have to rip your body in half.
You can't just like walk over there. You gotta just
You
I'd
gotta
like,
hide your
I'd like them to
legs in
do
the
a
forest.
twist on it too, though, because there's always like, oh, but then you just have to pour salt on its lower half. That seems like an easy
Well, you
way
have
to
You
defeat
gotta
it.
the
find
lower
its
half.
stump
you
in the
gotta
middle of
find
the
its lower
woods.
half first. Come on.
Yeah.
Oh,
You
I
can't just
know.
leave it out in the open.
You can't use iodized salt. It's got to be the salt that comes straight from seawater. Mm.
Oh,
What
Or
about
it could be
kosher
the
salt? Does
ashes
kosher
from
salt work?
Palm Sunday.
So a smart one would live nowhere near the ocean.
Who said-
I
And
mean,
hope they
I
don't-
have
that
sea
there's
salt
no
in my
chef
cabinet.
around.
Yeah,
Yeah,
There's
I
no
got some-
Kim around who just has
doesn't
like
count.
sea salt.
I got some flaky sea salt in my
Store
pantry.
bought stuff doesn't count.
It was great on cookies.
It needs to be from Manila Bay,
No.
along
okay.
with the
Oh.
fake sand.
Oh, no wonder
with the
it
fake
melts.
sand.
Like if it's from Manila Bay. And
It would
Doesn't
kill
kill
everyone.
anything.
You realize
Yeah.
a bay is freshwater, right?
oh, oops. We're smart. How do you know this? Are you a Shokoy?
Totally
Oh
worth
my
it.
god. How many Shokoys would know this?
Kim, you will be happy to hear this. One of the books actually does focus completely on shokois.
Yes.
Um, so the next question is, was there a Trese effect? And by this I mean, did watching the show make you go into anything, like dive into anything? Because for me, I ended up reading a lot of Filipino comics, like like pretty much exclusively for like a week after this show, being like, oh, I gotta find what else they can adapt into Netflix. Maya dug up that thing, that paper that her Lola wrote.
Yeah, the alum paper. But maybe that was a comics cube effect, Jose.
Oh well, I'll take it. Anyone else?
Yeah.
I mean,
I
Kim
had
says shokoy a
pancit
lot.
and sisig for lunch yesterday. And that was it clearly made me miss a little bit of home. And I found a restaurant that was close, that had Filipino food. So
I've definitely been craving Filipino food. I would love for them to do
Oh
that
my
in season
God.
2. Also put more food in there just to like
Yeah.
entice people.
Yeah.
I already want chocolate.
I don't like
so
how they did
bad.
it in Spirited Away, where like you see them eating and you're like, this is fantastic. I want to eat that too.
How many of you ended up craving chocolate right after this show?
Oh, I'm not a big fan of chocolate.
No one.
I'm not
God,
either,
that was
but
Chocolate's not good.
But you just
It's
you,
not
you-
delicious.
Not good.
It's just addictive as hell.
It's one of those things, I'll eat it if it's there, but
yes.
seeing someone eat it has no effect on me. So,
Why is my
So I ended up diving into the Aswang project afterwards. I mean, it was something that like the folklore is something I've always been interested in, but like, let's be real, we're all adults and we don't have time. And so I kind of left it on the back burner for a while, just doing that kind of research. And after watching that, I was like, okay, like I really now need to know more, because I don't know a lot about it, you know, like I'm mixed background, so it wasn't huge in my childhood necessarily. So I did a lot of reading and discovered a lot of things that were a little bothersome, just in terms of where certain words that we as Filipinos use come from, things that I didn't realize growing up, because a lot of our terminology has been blanketed by Spanish terminology. So 2 examples that spring to mind, in the first episode of Trese, they talk about the sirena, or the mermaids. And we tend to think, even in the Philippines, the sirena is one thing. But the Filipino mermaids are actually very different depending on which province you go to. And they all have their own names, and they all look different, and they all have different victims. And one thing that's really unique about Filipino mermaids is they're generally in rivers and not in the ocean. So when you hear sirena, you automatically think, oh, Western mermaid. And that's
for Cat's
not the
benefit, Manila Bay is still not a river.
But
You
like,
also probably wouldn't picture mermaids in Manila Bay either. 'Cause
no, they
that's
would be dead.
gross.
But so things like that, like even the word duende, which I was convinced was Filipino, because it sounds Filipino. After reading the Aswang Project, it comes from dueño de la casa, which is Spanish, owner of the house. And so I had no idea how much of our culture was changed during the colonization. And so that was a little bit bothersome to me, to be like, oh, these things I thought were Filipino are, but are not at the same time. But just learning more about it too was like super cool. Like there's like mermaids that have 2 tails. Like, what? That's so Filipino. They've got 2 tails, not one.
And the one from Starbucks.
Then that, yeah, that's different.
So the Starbucks mermaid is a Filipino.
Is a Filipino mermaid, apparently, from Zambales specifically.
So, absolutely.
Hey, there's a
You
lot
heard
of
it here
Filipinos in
first.
Seattle. You'd be surprised. There's actually a
So-
really good Filipino restaurant in Pike Place, but
This is
Go on.
this is interesting, because you're saying that they might not have been Filipino at all. But what if they were? What if they were, and then we got colonized, and then the Spanish
Well,
grafted.
it's
the
not
ribs
that they're
over it?
not Filipino at all. It's just that our understanding of it has been put under an umbrella blanket, like a blanketed term, which is not
Mhm.
exactly what they were. Like they are Filipino in origin. It's just that because of the blanketed term, we think of it as one particular thing. So it's like if we think of the duende, like Kyle talks about the dark and light duende. So that's always sort of been part of our folklore. And, you know, there's like the tabi-tabi po, which is part of our culture. However, depending on which region of the Philippines you go to, the duende is different. Like there's a duende that transforms into a white stag that has one eye. And we don't ever hear about those kinds of things because we've come to think of it as generally one thing. And I think that came from that colonization, that sort of overtake of our language.
That's all of Filipino history, though. It's all sort of inextricable now. Like there's so much Spanish influence. I mean, like the other language that I kind of sort of understand is Bisaya, and it's so Spanish. Like there's so much Spanish influence in all of the words, where it's like duende is Spanish, but it's also, I mean, it's also Tagalog, basically. It's all sort of been meshed together, and it's so hard to try to find out where those things separate, like what influenced what at this point.
Yeah, I know when we went to Maya's Imbango, Maya, your aunt kept on saying the gods. And but at the same time she also kept saying God, which pointed to the, you know, to the very strong, I'm not even going to say it's a possibility, it's almost definitely what happened. You know, the Spanish probably showed up, took a look at the polytheistic nature of that particular region, and then said, all right, so we're grafting Catholicism over this right now.
Yeah. That's how you can do the imbango and then on the next day go to church, Good Sunday.
Yeah, but they coexist, right?
Yeah.
But is it a forced existence though? Like that's the whole thing. It's like I always thought that yes, the Spanish came, yes, they colonized us, but there was always this narrative of they interwove their culture with ours. Not necessarily they took over our culture with theirs. But the more that I look into it, it seems like maybe they did. Like, I don't know.
This is
But
that.
wasn't
now.
that a mechanism in order to like weave yourself into, you know, essentially like influence
Forced integration.
Yeah, forced integration.
But I think when it comes to religion, you'll see elements of that pretty much anywhere you go, which I don't think is unique to the Philippines, how Christianity is grafted onto local cultures, because you'll see that in Latin America, you'll see that in Africa as well. So I don't know about whether or not it's forced, but I guess does it even matter whether it's forced or willing?
At this point, it doesn't, because that's like way in the past and we can't do anything about it anymore.
But it's like it's like colonizing the U.S. too. It's like the Native American culture did not survive the way the Filipino culture, Native culture has probably survived in the Philippines. So it's sort of like maybe we're more resilient than we think.
I think in many ways, to Kat's point, that Filipino culture probably survived or did better in response to colonialism than many other cultures did. For example, like, you know, the Philippines doesn't speak Spanish as its native language, right?
Yeah.
Whereas you go to South America, Latin America, that's totally not the case.
That's true.
Yeah, for sure. We're probably just really stubborn people that are like, no, thank you.
I think
Super
we're
stubborn.
also
There's something
really
about
far
being
away.
adaptive. Yeah.
Well, it's also our geography.
Yeah,
Like,
I think we're
You can't get to us. We're a bunch of islands in the middle of the ocean.
And then if you do get to us, we're just gonna go to the other island.
That's pretty much the
I would
history of the Philippines.
love,
and them
yeah, I would love
resisting.
to see that in a future season too, where it's like duendes from different islands meet each other and they're completely different, and they're like, "What the hell? Like, who are you?"
Who are
That's
you?
something
I'm a
that would be
duende.
really
What?
cool.
No, I'm a duende.
It would be really cool in season 2 if they set it at least a couple of episodes outside of Manila.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
I think that would be really interesting to see, because there
I
are so
agree.
many cultures and things in the Philippines. Like we're
Yeah.
different, even though we're all Filipino. So
I agree. Yeah, I think also Kim, to your point earlier about the voice acting in Filipino, I think maybe one of the reasons it's that formal is because of the other provinces. maybe what
Makes
we
sense.
think of as colloquial as people from Manila isn't the colloquial everywhere else. And how would we know since we don't
Right.
live there? So anyone else have an effect after watching the show that's not related to food?
I
All
looked
about
up,
food.
Everything is related to food. Come on.
Kyle?
I mean,
Looked
I
up a
only
lot of-
finished it 2 days ago, so I haven't had enough time to digest and react.
Kyle?
I looked up a lot of movies that I watched as a kid, like Tito, Vic, and Joey movies, like where they were superheroes, or
She-Man,
also movies
Mistress of the Universe?
yeah, Starzan. What was the other one? Captain Barbell, Darna. Like I watched all those when I was a kid, so it definitely made me start looking them up again. Especially since you told me that some of these characters were part of the original Trese stories.
Darna
So
is in the
maybe-
comics, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Isn't Captain Barbell too? No,
Captain Barbell's also in the comics.
Yeah.
They can't use them in the show.
I know. So I just had to like, had to look them up and relive my childhood a little bit.
I think in the same lines of like the reflection that Kyle did, for me, I think because we were talking a lot about voices and voice acting and stuff, the Philippines has a very rich tradition of like translating things that are in English into Tagalog or Japanese into Tagalog or into English and Tagalog. Like I remember like Voltus 5, original Japanese text, most Filipinos have seen it, know it, was translated in both English and Filipino by Filipinos. So I think it's like that rich tradition of like, yeah, we dub and do everything, like even Korean dramas and even telenovelas in Mexico, like
Marimar.
Marimar and all that stuff, all translated into Filipino, right?
Marimar.
And it's like, it's such a big thing for us to like translate and dub things. And I just, I have distinct memories of some of the best like Filipino voice acting, like coming in a lot of the Channel 2 ABS-CBN shows. Like, I don't know if anybody would remember Peter Pan, Julio and Julia,
I remember Peter
Munting
Pan.
Principe. All of those were translated into both English and Filipino. And we're pretty good at it, I think. And even just like, and that's the thing, it's like the English that the Filipinos spoke into those shows and how that like reflects, it just made me think about it. I think that's what it was. And which to the point where I kind of had to YouTube some old Voltus 5 episodes just to remember. It's like, oh man, that brings me back.
My last question is, where do you guys think the Filipino creative community, but whether it's the creators, creators themselves, not just comics or cartoons, and the fans, where do we go from here?
I think,
Wherever you want.
I mean, I think taking pride in our own creations and our own culture. Like there's been many things in the Philippines that have been so based on Western, TV shows or whatever. I mean, like I'm thinking Tabing Ilog, like Dawson's Creek, but Filipino, and it's, and we do that. Like we do that with our shows. It's like we take a Western show and we try to make it Filipino. But the fact of the matter is there is so many amazing like comics or books or just things from the Philippines that given the right marketing, given the opportunity, can be just as successful. So I think we need to take a step back and say, listen, we don't need to copy that. We don't need to bring in the Korean and the whatever and all this kind of stuff. We have things to celebrate in our community and we should do it. Like I think that's the next step, right? Because we've always been those people that are like, well, we'll take this. And I mean, like just what you were saying, Kim, we'll take this, we'll dub it over in Tagalog, we'll dub it over in English. But we have things too that we could just make,
I think if there's a time to try to succeed in the international sphere, it's now, because all these streaming services are coming out and they're competing with each other for content, and they're hungry for original material. They're hungry for intellectual properties and franchises. And we're going through a period now where there's a lot of stuff that's being recycled, and there's a lot of remakes, there's a lot of remasters, and I mean the Western audience wants new stuff. So there's a big market for international scripts and international material. And I think now is the time to try to get your work out there if you have something that you think can succeed.
Yeah.
And like Jose was saying, Budge had been trying for, what was it, 14 years to get Trese?
Yeah, it was
6?
Yeah, I guess you would say it's 16 years since it finally got released, but it got
16.
picked up 2 years ago, so that would have been 14 years.
Yeah.
So what
he's
you're
been
saying
trying
is that we need to
for a long time.
re-release She-Man and the Mistress, She-Man and the Mistress of the Universe.
Yes, bring that back.
But I think,
you know,
yeah, well, go ahead. Sorry.
but yeah, he'd been trying to release it or he'd been pitching it for so long, and now is the time that somebody took a chance on him, thankfully, to release it. It's because that's what they're looking for now. They're looking to branch out into other countries and see what they can take to sell back home, basically.
Yeah, I think to Kyle's point, if you look at Netflix today, or at least this is just on my algorithm, you'll see a ton of international shows, stuff from Korea, Japan, China, Mexico, Spain, Brazil, whatever. Right? It's all over the place. And what I'd love to see is Filipino content at the same level as everything else, where if it's accessible, people don't bat an eye and think, oh, this is so unique and special. It's just one of the many options that you have that people just understand is out there and available. And I think that would be really cool to have the mainstreaming of like Filipino and other cultural content that today is few and far in between.
You want to get to the point where it's not special.
Yeah,
Right.
I'd love to get to the point where it's not special.
You have to be careful to do it well, because you can have the concept be there, but if the execution isn't done on par with all the other products, then it'll be easy to say, oh no, that stuff's not good, and then suddenly a whole genre is gone. So I think it's a good start now with Trese being, I think, successful and done well, but we should be careful not to flood then the market with a lot of not as well executed products.
You can't afford it to suck.
That's a
At this
lot of
point, we can't
pressure.
afford for it to suck.
Kim, you were saying?
No, I was just gonna say it's a lot. There was a lot of pressure. I feel like if I was the first like Filipino animated like show on a major thing like Netflix, I would be like, oh my God, I have to do this right. It has to be great. Well, because you have so many things working against you, right? Like it sucks to admit that sometimes even Filipinos feel that Filipino everythings are inferior. It's pervasive in the culture. It's like either people view it as like cheap or just poorly made or whatever, just because. But we know that that's not the case.
And I live here.
Yeah, and that's just true, and it's hard to shake that. I think when I was talking to a lot of Filipino Americans that I know, or Filipinos who grew up here, about Trese, when I was telling them about it, that was like one of the things that they said. It's like, oh, is it like that? It's like, well, I hate that that's the first question that you ask, but I understand where you're coming from, because I'm pretty sure maybe your parents or family like brought something from the Philippines and you just kind of laugh at it, right? So yeah, I think there is that kind of pressure, but I hope that this first season was a good start, and whatever they continue with would show. It's like, yes, there's excellence in things that are Filipino and the stories that we share and our culture and all that stuff.
Yeah,
but I would probably crumble.
Well, there may be a preconception that the stuff we do is cheap and bad. It's like, it doesn't have to be, right?
That's not
That's where
always
you change the conception.
You change the conception. Yeah.
And also, like Ben was saying, like making it when it's the only thing, and with the pressure of that, it's like it has to be everything all at once to everybody that's Filipino, and which is impossible considering how diverse all of the Philippines is and the experiences all over the world. But I think it is getting to that point where it starts to feel more normal to see like, oh, look, there's a Filipino on screen. And I feel like that's happened more in the past few years than I can ever remember in my entire life, where it's like, just watching like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, it was like, oh my God, she's a Filipino pilot. I hear Tagalog music playing. and like watching shows where it's like, hey, Manny Jacinto is playing this Filipino character, and he's not a stereotypical character on The Good Place. Like he's sort of like a funny, attractive himbo that everyone has a crush on. Like, this is so weird.
What's up, Pillboy? Yeah.
Pillboy,
You
Pillboy
hear
on
it in
Loki.
you hear it in video games too. Like once in a while, you hear something in Filipino.
Yeah,
said
it's
in
really
video.
What
it's
about
really
Blue's
cool.
Clues,
It
Chad?
feels
What about
really
Blue's
exciting.
Clues?
And Blue's Clues, yeah, that the host of Blue's Clues is Filipino, and he brings his Lola on, and they sing Tagalog songs together with the kids. I'm like, what is happening? It's so exciting, and also that Jokoy is going to get a sitcom on ABC. Like it's huge, and it's going to make a Filipino family be a normal thing that you see weekly, and that they're going to be funny and hopefully relatable to everybody, no matter where they're from. I think it'll make such a big impact on the culture and normalizing Asian and Filipino content.
Well said. I think that wraps it up. Thank you everyone for joining me on this roundtable. Everybody click like, share, and subscribe. Let us know what you think in the comments. And bye.
Bye, Jose.